On Thursday, China warned Nepal. A lake had formed right at the border, 2 million cubic meters of water behind a wall of rubble, and it might give way. Nepal moved people uphill. The warning worked. 2 days earlier, the same river had carried a wall of water taller than an apartment block through the same valley. It killed close to 500 people. Nobody called. Same river, same two countries, same week. The warning came for the slow disaster and not for the fast one. And that is not an accident. It is a rule. Here is what the physics gave people to work with. At 37 minutes past 8 on Wednesday morning, a piece of glacier broke off a mountain in Tibet and fell more than a kilometer. Seismometers in Germany and the United States felt it within minutes. The ice and rock dammed a small river. The dam gave way, and the flood covered the first 22 kilometers at roughly 190 kilometers an hour. From the break to the border was about 7 minutes. 10 minutes after that, it reached the town of Syabrubesi. Now here is what the institutions did with those minutes. Nepal's flood office learned the wave existed about 16 minutes after it crossed the border, 6 minutes after it had already gone through Syabrubesi. And it learned this not from China, but from its own district office in the valley, which by then was watching the river go past. Within minutes of that, the office sent more than 500,000 text messages downriver. The 4 automatic river gauges nearest the border were already gone, swept away with the bridges, so downstream, the system worked. Upstream of the border, it did not exist, which raises the obvious question, why not? The flood came from Tibet. Tibet has gauges. Why did nothing cross the line before the water did? This is not the first time. 13 months earlier, in July of last year, a lake sitting on top of a glacier in Tibet burst. That flood came down the same river, took out the same border bridge, and killed 18 people. Nepal's flood office said afterwards that it had received no warning because there was no formal channel for one. So the two governments met, and by late August of last year, they had agreed to share information about glacial lake risk. On paper, the gap was closed. Then, 2 weeks before this flood, a landslide blocked a neighboring branch of the same river on the Chinese side. Nepal found out when the water level dropped, no message came, and on Wednesday, the wave came down the same river again. So the agreement existed and the warning still did not, which means the problem is not whether the neighbors talk. It is what kind of thing the agreement is. Think about a river gauge. It is a post in the water with a sensor on it. Every few minutes, it produces a number. The question that decides everything is, whose number is that? The answer, everywhere in the world, is the same. The number belongs to the country the post stands in. There is no general law that says a country must tell the country downstream what its rivers are doing. That duty exists only where two countries have written it down and signed it. There is a treaty that does exactly this, a United Nations Convention on Shared Rivers, written in 1992. Its Article 14 says that countries sharing a river must warn each other of a critical situation without delay and must build joint alarm systems to do it. China has not signed it. Nepal has not signed it. Neither has India. So what did the two governments agree last August? To share information, not who calls whom, not within how many minutes, not on which line and who is sitting at the other end at 8:30 on a Wednesday morning. That kind of agreement is a courtesy. A courtesy is real. And this week it worked for a lake that sat there for a day while someone checked the numbers. It cannot work for a wave that needed the call to be automatic because a courtesy has no deadline in it. You would think the fix is simple. Write the deadline into the agreement. Who calls whom and within how many minutes. So let's see what that costs. The Rhine has that deadline written in. In 1986, a chemical warehouse burned in Basel, and the water used to put it out carried tons of pesticide into the river, killing fish for hundreds of kilometers downstream into 3 other countries. The countries on the Rhine wrote a rule. Any country that sees an accident or an imminent flood must inform the others immediately, not eventually, immediately. There are main alarm centers along the river, a model that predicts where a wave will be and when, and drills to test that the phone gets answered. That is the Article 14 you just heard, running for 40 years. Now the price. The Rhine countries handed each other their river data because none of them considers its stretch of river a military secret. Tibet is a border zone. A live feed of what its rivers are doing is also a live feed of how its dams are being run. For the country upstream, a duty with a deadline hands the neighbor a lever over you. China has never signed a duty like that with India, a far bigger neighbor. And notice, this is not a Chinese habit. India sits upstream of Bangladesh, Turkey sits upstream of Iraq, and neither has signed a duty with a deadline either. So Nepal is left with the second design. If the neighbor will not owe you the data, buy it. That is the arrangement India already has with China. India buys it. Since 2008, India has paid China every year for the readings from 3 gauges on the Brahmaputra, a river that starts in Tibet. The contract even has a line about immediate notice of anything abnormal. The price is what happens when a contract meets a border dispute. In 2017, the two armies faced off on a plateau in the Himalayas. That flood season, the data stopped. China said its stations were being upgraded. Bangladesh, further downstream, kept receiving readings from the same stations. The feed came back a year later, and the feed only runs from mid-May to mid-October. For 7 months of the year, there is nothing to buy. Nepal would be a much smaller customer than India, which leaves one design that asks nobody for anything. Remember the seismometers. Instruments in Germany and the United States felt the glacier fall within minutes. No treaty, no payment. Physics does not stop at a border. Satellites are the same. The cause of last year's flood was worked out from orbit after the fact. On the Mekong in 2020, a satellite study showed China's dams holding back water during a drought downstream. Beijing called the study groundless, and 6 months later signed up to share river data all year round after 18 years of sharing it only in the wet season. There was no treaty behind that. There was a picture that anyone could see. So Nepal could put a seismic trigger of its own on its own side of the border and wire it straight to its own sirens, skipping the phone call entirely. Here is the price, and it is the hardest of the 3. On Wednesday morning, the first reading of that seismic signal was wrong. The experts called it an earthquake. It took hours to reclassify it as a glacier falling. A trigger fast enough to matter has to fire before anyone has checked, which means it will fire for earthquakes, for quarry blasts, for large landslides that dam nothing. And after the third empty siren, the official who quietly switches it off breaks no rule at all. Nepal already has a set of automated sirens at a glacial lake near Everest, installed 10 years ago. They are rusting, and some have no batteries. So who answers for the third empty siren? And who is checking the batteries in the meantime? Go back to Thursday, the lake at the border, and the call that came. Nobody broke a rule on Wednesday. The public argument is whether the neighbor should have called. But each of the 3 designs answers a different question. Whether a country upstream will bind itself with a deadline, whether it will sell you the number, or whether you will build a machine that sounds the alarm without asking anyone and live with every time it sounds for nothing. There are 28 more lakes above this valley, and the next one over that are rated as likely to burst. 60% of the land that drains into this river is on the other side of the line. The next wave is a matter of when. So when it comes, the useful question will not be why nobody called. It will be whether any of these 3 rules was written down in the meantime, and who agreed to pay its price.